On board as well, Bob Weiner, Democratic strategist, columnist, former communications director for Clinton drug czar General Barry McCaffrey, former chief of staff for House Committee on Aging, former communications director for Congressman Rangel and Conyers of New York and Michigan, respectively. He also worked for Claude Pepper. And if we stick with him long enough, we'll find him going right back to Lyndon Johnson, right? Lyndon Johnson? No, I know. You were with Mayor Lindsay in New York. That was it.
No, Koch. Ed Koch.
Koch?
Ed Koch when he
Mayor
was congressman
Lindsay.
before he was mayor. That's how old I am.
Listen, you look at Bob, trust me, he doesn't look a day over 74. No, you're looking fine. Guy runs around every day. Amy, to you, intriguing developments as it relates to this war on the payroll tax cut extension. It looks as if we might just have a House-Senate conference committee on this subject after all. Apparently, Speaker Boehner, with his brethren GOP, have decided to say no to a deal that he originally seemed to be quite receptive to, the idea that we could have the payroll tax cut, but it would be extended for only 2 months with the understanding that within those 2 months, the president would finally come forward and either A, approve the Keystone Pipeline running from Canada to Texas, the oil pipeline, or B, would give a reason as to why it would be a threat to national security, one of the two. Anyway, it gets over to the House. Boehner says, no, it doesn't look like that. And Eric Cantor, one of the GOP leaders in the House, he says, look, we're going to go ahead and give people 12 months versus 2 months. That's what he's saying. He says their approach will at least give folks certainty for 12 months. The Dems aren't buying it. How do you see this unfolding?
Well, I think a number of things are going on. I mean, obviously, there's the whole debate over the tax cut, but a couple other things. One is that the Speaker of the House really can't control his own members. That's a result of last year, 2010, in which a lot of conservatives and Tea Party members were elected. He went back to the House and found out that he didn't have support. But the second thing, and I think it's extremely important to get into this, is that the Senate has somewhat been broken in terms of doing any kind of sane appropriations process, and the guys in the House are pretty much fed up with the notion that they send over bills and the Senate doesn't have committee hearings, doesn't do things properly. There's been no budget out of the Senate for years and years and years. So with the senators now saying that it's important to them that they go home for Christmas, there's an awful lot of sentiment on the Hill for simply saying, screw that, you guys can just work because you haven't finished your job and you could have, and you didn't bother, so let's just stay here and keep working.
Yeah, otherwise, Bob, it looks as if they're saying, you know what, we're going to take the consequences, we're going to say that the consequences for wrongdoing have now become the grounds for not stopping it. And because we procrastinated too long, you got to turn this around because 2 months is the best deal we could get. Of course, it sounds as if they're saying, our habit of procrastinating now becomes your emergency. And the House is saying, no, your inclination to procrastinate is not our emergency. We're not going to put it through the conventional way, the House-Senate Conference Committee. Let me ask you, Bob, the House GOP, are they going to win on this, or will the American people prefer yes on 2 months versus yes on 12 months, but a few days later?
Well, here's what the American people prefer by 20, saying that the Republicans are complete obstructionists, and when Biden and others have said that it's like negotiating with Jell-O on the wall. Schumer said that also on one of the Sunday shows. That's the deal.
Well, that's all right. Boehner said that about the Democrats before when they were going through whether or not the government should be shut down and also whether or not they should raise the debt ceiling.
To say that you can't take 2 months because you only want permanent, after you said that you'll take whatever the Senate does, you negotiate in good faith with the Senate. The Senate says yes by 89 to 10, and the House says go, to yourself. That is just an absurd method of governing.
Folks just joining us, by the way, let me reintroduce you. Folks, if you're just joining us, I'm yours, Alan Nathan, the militant moderate. You're listening to Battle Line, aired nationally on the Main Street Radio Network. And we have with us right now Amy Ridenour, president of the National Center for Public Policy Research, Bob Weiner, Democratic strategist. We're discussing right now the delay in the extension of the payroll tax cut. We were hoping to get a year. The Senate only came up with 2 months. Amy, to you, but the president himself said, I would have preferred a year. And now the GOP are saying, you know what, we agree with the president. Will that fly, or will, as Bob stated, will this all be seen by Americans or will Republicans be perceived by Americans as being obstructionists? By the way, quick sideline here. The moment you dissent, you become an obstructionist. So it would seem then that the Democrats are saying by default the only thing that's acceptable is their way at all times.
No,
because, Bob, it would seem the moment you encounter
dissent,
the moment you encounter dissent, you can argue you've encountered obstructionism. But anyway, Amy, to you, what about that? You've got the vast majority of the Senate that did come on board this go around. Even though I'm saying technically the House has every right to put it through a House Senate Conference Committee if the two chambers are in disagreement. Still, when you get 89 of those suckers agreeing, that almost in and of itself seems to be something you want to take advantage of. Although on this occasion, perhaps the GOP are still smart in avoiding it. Your read on this, Amy Ridenhour.
Well, no, I don't think so. I mean, what's the big problem here? It's that senators want to go home for Christmas. They didn't get their job done. I think the American people's attitude is going to be, if you didn't get your job done, you can work. Most Americans, unless they're unemployed, which of course is a lot, will work through Friday, and they might get a day off, but they might go to work on Monday. They don't see any reason why senators need to take a few weeks off. And yes, it's true, some of them live in California, and it's not convenient to go home at night. But the bottom line is this is a voluntary job, and there isn't a single guy or woman up there who hasn't tried very hard to get it.
Yeah, Bob, I gotta tell you, if by the deadline, essentially, these guys are able to pull out a 12-month deal versus a 2-month deal, well, then in retrospect, it will prove to be the correct thing. And right now, as you look at it and judge it in real time, the Republicans can honestly say, you know what, the president said he'd prefer to have a year-long deal, and we want to give it to him, and we think we can. I don't know how the polls are going to help the Dems on this one.
Because people perceive us governing in good faith. And when on Thursday, Boehner says, I'm committed to deal with whatever the Senate does, on Saturday, Boehner calls a deal a good deal. And then now all of a sudden he says, no, because 80 of his members, the Tea Party caucus, say no. And if he did 80, subtract your 80, but go with the 200 Democrats, you got a vast majority.
Well, that's Boehner's fault. And what that means, Bob, is that Boehner never had the support to utter the statement he did. So if anything, Amy Ridenhour, I can insist all day long that the GOP may have a point insofar as wanting to go a year instead of just 2 months. But if Boehner gave the impression that he had the sort of support to give them the impression that 2 months was fine versus 12, then Boehner, that's all on Boehner. He can't jettison accountability to anybody else, can he?
Said he had support he didn't have, of course. But bottom line is this is democracy. You need to have a majority in the House. They don't have it. So.
But democracy doesn't mean only Republicans.
No,
it means that, like NAFTA, like Clinton didn't. Hold on. Like Clinton didn't.
Of the House, that's democracy.
Like Clinton did NAFTA, you can do it with a minority of your party and a majority of the other. And that's what Boehner needs.
Assisting me in the opining department, old friends to the show, my regulars for this part of the day, none other than Amy Ridenhour. First, she, of course, she's the president of the National Center for Public Policy Research. Good to have you back, Amy.
Thank you, Alan.
On board as well, Bob Weiner, Democratic strategist, as well as columnist, also former communications director for Clinton Drug Czar General Barry McCaffrey. Bob, good to have you as well.
Thanks, Alan. I just found that this tidbit. House Republicans pushed 2-month payroll tax holiday into January 2009, but today's House GOP argues that a 2-month holiday is hard to implement Democratic ploy to put them in a compromising political position. Why do you think the American people don't see through it also?
Well, for a man who's so big on polls, I can't wait to ask you what you thought about Gallup determining that the vast majority of Americans are far more upset about big government than they are big business. But getting back to your media point right now, it's funny because by your measure, any argument can be expanded into a multitude of other arguments, essentially allowing you to escape from your half of the original rub. Why? Because you just couldn't defend it. What's the original rub in this case? 2 months versus 12 months. And the fact that they want to make the president go along. Let me finish. They want to make the president go along. They want to make it is better, and the president wants it. Why not do it if it's reachable?
Absolutely.
You don't know for a fact that it's not.
The Republicans push you against the wall, so why not take the 2, come back in January, and finish the job? It's simple. And the American people
because you have more. Why? I don't know why. Why did Boehner say what he said? I don't know if that's exactly what he did.
And that was the deal.
But Amy, I want to go back to you. Amy, I gave Bob a chance. Let me go to you on this one, Amy. It looks as if what we have here right now is a division over whether or not the president should be pressured to do Keystone. But the reality is, Harry Reid, I think, threw the wrench into this whole mix because we already had the State Department thumbs up on approval to Keystone. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton supported the pipeline. Reid told her, wait a minute, he thinks that those wanting the pipeline should instead turn away from dirty oil to green jobs because that's where all the real money is and all the employment opportunities are to be had. But that's a tertiary measure. The primary measure is, did it meet a 3-year investigative study of the State Department? According to Hillary Clinton, the answer was yes. And it looked as if the only reason to turn things around or to slow it down was to kiss the ass of the hardcore environmentalists who think that theirs is the only universe in which all of us should live, Amy Ridenhour.
Well, yes, there is a pretty strong consensus that the only reason the president hasn't approved this at this point is that he doesn't want the environmentalists mad at him until after the election. The unions want this, the Republicans want this, people who want jobs want this, and so forth. And even after all this went through about 2 weeks ago with the fuss, the Canadians changed the plan to even make it even less offensive to the environmentalists. So it just seems to be politics, and few people are disputing that. So I completely agree with you. That said, I think really what we're dealing with now on the payroll tax cut extension is whether it should be 2 months or 12 months and whether the Senate should have to work through Christmas. And I really don't see why people are so upset, at least in Washington, that the Senate might have to work. If it had done its work all year long, this would be done by now. So, maybe they'll learn from it. Do better next year.
Alan, I think
Bob,
you're raising an issue.
Bob, I got to get back to you with the Democrats. Now, Democratic union leaders like AFL-CIO Richard Trumka, even he has been agreeing with corporate America against Democratic environmentalists on this. Now, this is definitely an irony, I think, lost on no one. But overall, the critics, the environmentalists, Bob, claim that extracting the crude adds too much greenhouse gas. And other problems with the pipeline might harm sensitive habitat. But, Bob, isn't it fair to say that by such a measure, bad faith activists can justify refusing all future oil permits because they're subjecting oil businesses to an unattainable standard, given that the quote-unquote possible or the quote-unquote might opposition argument has no standard, Bob. And if there's no point of finality to a standard, doesn't it cease to be one? Bob Weiner?
Alan, we're a day late and a dollar short on this issue. As Schumer said on the Sunday shows, the president conceded on this issue, holding his nose, but in order to govern and get the payroll tax arrangement done.
Oh, but he did. He said he would consider it. He didn't.
And the Republicans won't even negotiate.
The deal. No. Oh my God, this is awful. Have you no shame? Oh my God, Amy Ridenhour, to you. What am I missing? Here's the shame. Here's the shame you should have. Amy, am I wrong? Or perhaps I'm experiencing premature senility here. But the deal was that the president within 2 months would determine whether or not it was okay to approve the pipeline, or B, if he couldn't approve it, explain why it was somehow undercutting to our national interests. That still left the president open to not follow through, so I don't see that as a concession as Bob just characterized.
No, it pushes it to 2 months instead of a year decision.
But you said it was a concession, and there is no concession. You can't concede that which you're not obligated. What? It's a non-existent concession. Do you agree to consider it? Oh, yeah, I'll consider it. Big concession. Give me a break. Actually, you know what? I'm looking at the clock. I'm looking at the clock. I don't have much time here. Amy, go ahead and respond to that. Then I got to go to a different topic.
Right. The president wasn't going to be forced to make a decision in 2 months. And what it comes down to on the environment, too, is the oil is coming out of Canada. It's going to come out of Canada anyway. It's either going to go to China or it's going to go to us. If you care about the environment, who do you trust more, the commies or us? Seems to be a no-brainer.
No, good point.
You used to make the argument it created 20,000 American jobs. Then when we found out it only does 7,000 American, and the rest are all given to Canada, it became a little less loving.
No, but that's not the case. That's a categorical outright lie. That's a categorical outright lie. It's going to be like up to 180,000 additional jobs from the consequence of maintenance positions derived from this activity. Also, other chain reaction commerce is going to happen. But anyway, Zach, shifting gears, looking overseas. Zach, play the clip.
I think, and I think it's important, I know you've written about this, to understand what most Americans, I think, know, which is that we didn't invade Afghanistan. We did not send U.S. military personnel into Afghanistan because the Taliban were in power. They had been in power. We went into Afghanistan because al-Qaeda had launched an attack against the United States from Afghanistan. And what the vice president was reflecting is that, and this is related to the reconciliation process that I was just discussing, is that the Taliban per se, while we are fighting them, it is not the elimination of the Taliban is not the issue here.
All right. Now, what you were just listening to was the not so intellectually formidable musings of one Jay Carney. okay, the White House press secretary. He was asked about Vice President Joe Biden's remark that the Taliban per se is not our enemy. And he was explaining that it isn't. He says, I think it's important to understand that what most Americans know, what is that we didn't invade Afghanistan. We did not send U.S. military personnel into Afghanistan because the Taliban were in power. They had been in power. We went into Afghanistan because al-Qaeda had launched an attack against the United States from Afghanistan. But they were trying to say that the Taliban is not our enemy per se. I have to confess to both of you, and I'm not asking for an opinion on this because you have no opinion. You cannot respond with anything but, yes, Alan, we know you're right. This is an insane and an asinine observation because in early part of 2001, before 9/11, the Washington Post had reported a story that the Russians were very, very upset with the Taliban government of Afghanistan. And why is that? Because the Taliban government of Afghanistan had just officially made Osama bin Laden their commander-in-chief of their armed forces. Now, you can't, on one hand, be a government that officially makes a person commander-in-chief of the armed forces, and then, on the other hand, say that the government's not responsible for the act of war, because it was committed, by that same person who they hired as the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. So I'm asking this question first to you, Bob Weiner. Does it really make sense to assert that the Taliban are not our enemy per se, when in fact the person they hired as their commander-in-chief of the armed forces was the one who slaughtered 3,000 American citizens? Bob Weiner.
Well, you're absolutely right, Alan. Alan, you're absolutely right.
Thank you.
The point is that the Taliban funds al-Qaeda. They also authorize all the drug trafficking and get the money from it that harbors al-Qaeda. But the problem is that now we're down to, as the CIA said, about 100, if that, al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, and really the enemy is in Pakistan, where all the training takes place. And, by the way, where they found bin Laden being harbored by the Pakistani government. So,
but if you include the Taliban, then in fact we have a lot of enemy forces in all these other places. It's not just down to the limited al-Qaeda, is it, Amy Ridenhour? It is the Taliban, right, because that government attacked us.
Absolutely right, Alan.
Gee, you got a lot of it. You're right, Alan.
We didn't have enough time. Amy Ridenhour, you have a fantastic Merry Christmas, okay?
You too, Alan, and you too, Bob.
Thank you, and happy holidays, happy Hanukkah to everybody, happy Kwanzaa.
Bob Weiner, I was going to say happy Hanukkah to you, Bobby. Bob, all the best to all of you. Thanks, guys. Great having you as always. Just absolutely wonderful, good time. Folks, stick with us. You are with Battle Line, Main Street Radio Network. I'm Alan Neate.